What if the exact things you're doing to forcefully cure your restless nights are the very reasons you cannot fall asleep? You have probably spent a small fortune trying to build the perfect environment for rest. You bought the expensive blackout curtains to block the streetlights. You carefully set your bedroom temperature to the exact optimal degree recommended by every wellness podcast on the internet. You drink the warm chamomile tea. You rigidly put away your glowing screens an hour before bed, and you diligently listen to a guided meditation of rain falling on a tin roof. You treat your evening routine like a strict, high-stakes ceremony. And yet, you still find yourself lying there at 2 a.m, listening to the quiet rhythm of your own breathing, feeling completely wired. You watch people who drink coffee after dinner, fall asleep on a brightly lit couch, and wake up perfectly refreshed. You wonder what fundamental flaw exists inside your brain that makes a basic human function feel like an impossible puzzle. Society loves to hand you heavy, poetic explanations for this. They tell you that your subconscious is punishing you, keeping you awake to process some dark emotional trauma you are too afraid to face during the day. Or they tell you that your brain is permanently damaged. But what if your flawless bedtime routine is not relaxing you, but accidentally acting as a runway for severe performance anxiety? You're not cursed, and you're not fundamentally broken. You're just caught in a quiet, highly predictable mechanical loop. And the moment you stop trying to spiritually heal your insomnia and start looking at the actual plumbing of your biology, the entire room changes. Before we look at the psychology of the dark, we have to look closely at the raw physical hardware. People who overthink are incredibly quick to blame their sleeplessness on hidden trauma, suppressed emotions, or overwhelming daytime anxiety. We naturally gravitate toward a complicated psychological story because it feels meaningful. We want our suffering to have a profound narrative. But sometimes there is no deep emotional narrative at all. Sometimes the body is just experiencing a silent, purely physical interruption. Millions of people spend years in therapy trying to fix their racing thoughts at night, completely unaware that their actual problem is structural. You might have mild obstructive sleep apnea. Your airway slightly relaxes and narrows as you drift off, your oxygen drops a fraction of a percent, and your primitive brain detects a biological emergency. It spikes your adrenaline just to force you to take a deeper breath. You wake up suddenly with your heart beating faster and a mind full of anxious thoughts, automatically assuming you just had a random panic attack or an anxiety flare-up. You did not. You just needed air. Or you might have restless leg syndrome, where a subtle, creeping physical discomfort constantly interrupts your descent into deep sleep. It is an invisible neurological itch that forces you to constantly move your limbs the exact second you try to relax. Chronic joint pain that you tune out during the busy day, a silent thyroid imbalance, or even a simple iron deficiency can entirely shatter your sleep architecture from the inside out. These are purely medical realities. They require blood tests and physical sleep studies, not meditation retreats or deep philosophical thinking. You always have to investigate the physical hardware with a medical professional before you take the heavy personal blame for your sleeplessness. But here is where it gets strange. Let us assume your physical hardware is completely fine. You are healthy, you breathe perfectly, and you still cannot easily close your eyes. This is where the wellness industry hands you the most deeply frustrating advice ever invented: sleep hygiene. We are told that if we just make the bedroom a little colder, cut out caffeine a little earlier, and diffuse lavender oil, the body will naturally surrender to rest. But clinical sleep psychologists know a quiet truth about standard sleep hygiene. It is an incredibly weak standalone tool. It is essentially a set of gentle suggestions meant for people who already sleep perfectly well. For someone dealing with chronic sleeplessness, strictly focusing on sleep hygiene often makes the psychological problem significantly worse, because it turns sleep into a demanding job. You spend your entire evening actively monitoring your own relaxation. You try a progressive muscle relaxation technique, carefully clenching and releasing your toes, but you are doing it with an intense, desperate agenda. You are aggressively trying to relax. That is a biological paradox. Relaxation is the pure absence of effort. When you treat relaxation as a rigid task you must successfully execute, your brain registers the effort as a physical demand. It notices that you're working very hard to achieve a goal. And when the human brain works hard, it naturally stays awake to get the job done. You accidentally trigger a massive wave of performance anxiety inside your own bed. You're failing a test that nobody actually asked you to take. And this is exactly why what comes next makes absolutely no sense until it does. To understand why you're failing this invisible test, you have to look at the two very simple biological mechanisms that control your consciousness. Researchers call them Process S and Process C. Process S is your homeostatic sleep drive. It is a literal chemical hunger that builds up in your brain every single minute you are awake. A specific molecule called adenosine slowly fills the brain tissue throughout the day, creating a physical pressure that eventually forces your eyes shut. Process C is your circadian rhythm. It is the internal clock, driven heavily by natural daylight and core body temperature, that tells your body when to be alert and when to safely cool down. For a normal sleeper, these two systems align perfectly. The heavy chemical hunger meets the cooling clock, and sleep happens entirely automatically. But when you have chronic insomnia, you accidentally decouple these systems. You lie in bed feeling incredibly tired. Your bones physically ache, your eyes genuinely burn from looking at screens all day. But you're not actually sleepy. Tiredness is a physical state of exhaustion from mental or physical labor. Sleepiness is the biological ability to transition into unconsciousness. You can be profoundly tired without having enough pure chemical sleep drive to actually pull you under the surface. And when you lie there waiting for a transition that your chemistry is not currently capable of making, a quiet, completely natural frustration begins to build in your chest. You wonder why your body refuses to do the one thing it desperately needs to do. Most people think they just need to find a better, more advanced way to force their muscles to relax. They have it completely backwards. That quiet frustration is the exact moment the behavioral trap closes. The human brain is a flawless, deeply efficient association machine. It constantly links physical locations to emotional states without ever asking for your conscious permission. Think about how you feel when you walk into a dentist office. Even before you sit in the specific chair, the smell of the room and the bright fluorescent lights immediately make your shoulders tense up. Your brain perfectly remembers the context of the space. You accidentally do the exact same thing to your own mattress. If you spend night after night lying in the dark, feeling annoyed, alert, and desperately calculating how few hours you have left before your alarm rings, your brain starts to carefully take notes. It slowly begins to associate the physical texture of your sheets and the specific temperature of your pillow with the emotional state of active wakefulness. Your bed stops being a sanctuary for rest and silently transforms into a trigger for alertness. You can be sitting on your living room couch at midnight, barely able to keep your heavy eyes open. You feel wonderfully warm. But the absolute second you stand up, walk down the hall, and pull the covers over your chest, a biological switch flips. You're suddenly wide awake. The heavy exhaustion vanishes, replaced by a strange, humming energy. You have accidentally trained your nervous system to treat your bed like a place of active, waking effort. This is not a personal failure or a sign of an anxious disorder. This is pure classical conditioning. You have simply trained your brain to stay awake at the very sight of your own pillow. What comes next is the part most people never realize. The absolute first instinct, when you're sleeping poorly, is to spend much more time in bed. If you only get 5 hours of broken sleep, you logically assume you should lie there for 9 hours to try and catch small fragments of rest. But spreading 5 hours of biological sleep drive across a massive 9-hour window makes the sleep incredibly thin and fragile. You wake up at every small noise in the house. You spend 4 total hours fully awake in the dark, which only deeply reinforces the negative association with your mattress. To manually fix this, sleep specialists use a tool called sleep window consolidation. It is a major cornerstone of cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. You deliberately restrict the amount of time you're allowed to be in bed to match the exact amount of sleep you're actually capable of getting. If you only sleep roughly 6 hours, you're only allowed in bed for exactly 6 hours. You force yourself to stay up much later, and you force yourself to wake up early. You intentionally build up a massive, undeniable chemical hunger for sleep. You make the adenosine pressure so incredibly heavy that when your head finally hits the pillow, your brain literally has no choice but to pull you under. It forces your fragmented, broken sleep to compress into one solid block of rest. It feels deeply counterintuitive, and it makes you quite tired for the first few days, but it chemically resets the biological clock. But the chemical reset is only half the mechanical equation. You still have to manually break the psychological association between the bed and your frustration. This requires a strict behavioral rule called stimulus control. If you have been in bed for roughly 20 minutes and sleep has simply not come, or if you wake up in the middle of the night and feel that alert tension rising in your chest, you have to physically get up. You must leave the bedroom entirely. You cannot lie there and fight the wakefulness. You walk to a completely different room, keep the lights incredibly dim, and do something perfectly mundane. You read a boring physical book. You sit quietly in a chair. You do not check your phone or look at the glowing clock. You just wait. You wait until your eyelids feel genuinely heavy again, and only then do you slowly return to the bed. By doing this consistently, you systematically teach your primitive brain that the bed is exclusively used for successful sleep. You flatly refuse to let the mattress become a place of worry or active thought. And once I tell you the reality of attempting this alone, you will not look at yourself the same way. Reading about sleep restriction and stimulus control during the bright light of day makes perfect logical sense. But actually executing these strict rules alone at 3 in the morning is a completely different reality. When you wake up in the dark, your prefrontal cortex, the highly logical center of your brain that cares deeply about rules, future consequences, and long-term behavioral therapy, is essentially powered down. You are running entirely on primitive instinct and sheer physical exhaustion. The thought of getting out of a warm bed to go sit in a chilly, dark living room feels incredibly unfair. You easily rationalize staying under the covers. You bargain with yourself. You promise your tired brain that you will definitely fall asleep in just 5 more minutes. Doing this type of rigid behavioral change, completely unguided, relies entirely on your personal willpower, and willpower simply does not exist in the middle of the night. This is exactly why so many people try these techniques for a few days, feel completely overwhelmed by the effort, and abruptly quit. They assume the behavioral therapy failed, when in reality the unguided format failed them. Asking a severely sleep-deprived brain to act as its own strict therapist in the pitch black is a fundamentally unreasonable expectation. This is exactly why having external structure is so incredibly vital for your success. You absolutely do not have to do this alone. If you cannot work directly with a clinical sleep specialist, the modern medical landscape has built highly effective digital bridges. Clinically validated digital therapeutics like Sleepio, Shutai, or the CBT iCoach application are designed specifically to take the massive cognitive load completely off your shoulders. They do the specific sleep math for you. They calculate your exact sleep efficiency using daily sleep diaries and adjust your precise window accordingly. They gently guide you step by step through the behavioral changes based on your actual data. You just outsource your decision making to the algorithm. Having an external system completely removes the immense pressure of trying to perfectly manage your own therapy when you're simply too tired to think straight. It perfectly bridges the gap between logically knowing what to do and actually having the precise energy to do it. What comes next is the part that tends to make people uncomfortable because it is too accurate. There is one final behavioral tool that completely dismantles the quiet anxiety of the night. It is a concept called paradoxical intention. Since childhood, you have been taught that if you want a specific outcome in life, you have to try hard to achieve it. You study hard to pass a difficult test. You work hard to earn a living. Naturally, you apply this exact same waking logic to your own biology. You try incredibly hard to sleep. You forcibly close your eyes, you rigidly count your breaths, and you silently demand unconsciousness. But sleep is the one biological mechanism that actively rejects effort. The harder you try, the more elusive the rest becomes. Paradoxical intention requires you to completely drop the demand. You lie in bed, and you give yourself full, unconditional permission to be awake. You silently tell yourself that you are not going to aggressively chase sleep tonight. You are just going to rest your physical body. You keep your eyes gently open in the dark. You observe your racing thoughts without trying to stop them or manually change them. You completely remove the heavy pressure to perform. Think about the feeling of floating in deep water. If you panic, thrash around, and try to violently force yourself to float, you immediately sink. But if you just lay back, look at the sky, and surrender completely to the water, you naturally float. Sleep operates on the exact same mechanical principle. And a very strange thing happens in the human brain when the pressure is entirely gone. The perceived threat completely vanishes. The nervous system looks around, realizes there is no test to pass, no emergency to manage, and it simply stops pumping adrenaline into your bloodstream. The physical heat leaves your chest. The tight grip on your jaw loosens. You're no longer demanding a transition. You're simply allowing the quiet moment to exist. And in that quiet, unconditional surrender of effort, the heavy, natural wave of sleep finally has the absolute permission to wash over you. The night does not have to be a permanent source of frustration. You do not need to embark on a massive spiritual journey to fix your sleep. You do not need to unpack every single childhood trauma just to get 6 hours of solid rest. Your sleeplessness is not a deep character flaw or a sign of higher sensitivity. It is usually just a simple mechanical miscalibration, heavily complicated by a very normal human reaction to being awake in the dark. Once you rule out the organic medical realities, you're often just dealing with a stubborn behavioral habit, and human habits can always be safely rewritten. You just need to deeply respect the organic rules of your own machinery. You need to strategically build your biological hunger for sleep, fiercely protect the psychological association of your bedroom, and completely drop the anxious effort of trying to force unconsciousness. The process takes absolute patience. It requires you to step out of the bedroom when everything in your tired body wants to stay softly hidden under the covers. But the human mind is remarkably adaptable. It learns the wrong patterns easily, but it can unlearn them just as completely if you give it the right cues and the right structural support. The dark is not a hostile place designed to test you. It is a completely neutral space. It is just a quiet absence of sunlight. The only pressure in the room is the exact pressure you accidentally bring into it. The next time you find yourself awake, staring into the shadows, do not get angry at your biology. Recognize that your body is just temporarily confused. Stand up, leave the room, and let the wave pass entirely without fighting it. What is the most overly complicated sleep hygiene ritual you have ever tried that completely failed to help you rest? Tell me about your experience in the comments below. Reading through the practical, grounded struggles of others will quickly remind you that this frustrating experience is just a normal mechanical challenge that millions of people quietly share. People like you tend to carry a lot of invisible responsibility during the day, and it is perfectly normal for the mind to need a little extra structural help powering down. If this unromanticized perspective helped you see your own sleep a little more clearly, consider subscribing. We look at the actual, unfiltered mechanics of the mind here. Thank you for spending some of your time with me today. Remember, the quiet is not trying to hurt you. It is just waiting for you to stop trying so hard.